guess I've Thank you. I guess I've got the signal to start. So first of all, let me welcome everyone here for turning up for this very important event. We've got quite a few people watching us, over 50 people watching us online as well. So welcome to China, Africa, and the Rise of the Global South, a hybrid event organized by the Friends of Socialist China and supported by the Morning Star, Caribbean Labor Solidarity, the Black Liberation Alliance, and the International Manifesto Group. My name is Radhika Desai, and I'm the convener of the International Manifesto Group. Our speakers today, and we have an absolutely wonderful lineup of speakers, including Booker here, who will get pride of place and who has come all the way from Kenya to speak about all this today. Our speakers are going to help us to place Africa in the principal dynamic that is changing the world order today, powered by the refusal of most of the world, led by China, to follow the imperialist dictates of the West any longer, thus accelerating the decline of more than a 2-century-long imperial domination. In this dynamic, I would say that Africa holds a critically important place, thanks not only to its vast landmass, its enormous natural resources, and its potential to have the world's largest working age population by 2050, but also thanks to the political awakening and leadership that are increasingly evident there, of which, of course, Booker is an important part. And as we also saw, this being quite evident in West Africa. Indeed, throughout the continent, we witness a deep-rooted impulse to replace the imperial relations that have kept this objectively wealthy continent poor with a new set of relations that promise to realize Africa's potential for its people and for its land. This development is part of a century-long decline of imperialism. In my view, 1914 marked the peak of imperialism, the point where its two principal contradictions met, with inter-imperialist rivalry triggering the 30 years crisis of capitalism and imperialism, which included 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and many other things, the rise of fascism and what have you, which lasted from 1914 to 1945. And which then turbocharged the anti-imperialist resistance that would roll back formal imperialism in the decades after the Second World War and bring independence to the countries of Africa and Asia. And yes, the independence often proved only pro forma. Yes, the decline of imperialism since then has been very long and excruciatingly slow. And yes, it was even drastically set back by the last decades of the 20th century. All this is true, but the decline of imperialism has been occurring nevertheless. The best way to measure this decline is through development, since in the most profound sense, imperialism is about the denial of development, and anti-imperialism is the achievement of development. That is why in the early decades after independence, in country after country, we saw the pursuit of autonomous national development by cutting off the imperialist chains of underdevelopment. To be sure, most projects, like I was saying, were less successful than hoped. However, even their limited success had the third world by the 1970s internationally demanding better prices for primary commodities, industrialization, and indeed an entirely new international economic order. So threatened was the West that it launched the most vicious attempt to reimpose imperialist control with its Volcker shock, triggering the Third World Debt Crisis in the early 1980s, and the IMF and the World Bank acting as bailiffs for Western governments and capital, subjecting most third world countries, many of them in Africa, to actual economic retardation. Painful as it was with its plummeting commodity prices, high interest payments, reverse capital flows, famines, and above all, curbs on the very government expenditure and action that are the sine qua non of development. This too passed. As the new century opened, growth was recharged in a very different international environment, one in which China provided alternatives to imperial trade, financial, and investment linkages. In doing this, China was only playing the part reserved for the leading socialist countries in the battle against imperialism in at least 3 ways. Such countries have themselves made revolutions as much against imperialism as against capitalism. Occurring in the colonial and semi-colonial regions of the world, they had to undertake the task of their own development, not only from a stage of backwardness into which imperialism had cast them, but also in the teeth of fierce imperialist resistance. And thirdly, as they engaged in the task of their own development, they were keenly aware that this development and even their survival depended on accelerating and strengthening the fight against imperialism and for development elsewhere. So from the beginning, even when they were themselves very weak, socialist countries have always lent a helping hand to other developing countries. And before long, they were no longer weak. In its day, the Soviet Union had given indispensable economic and military aid to a whole range of countries in their fight against imperialism, and China today is in the forefront of that role. It is no wonder, therefore, that just as back then the Soviet Union was the target of unrelenting criticism, Cold War criticism, including criticism of its role in the Third World, so today, China's role in the developing world is under attack. China, we are told, is engaged in debt trap diplomacy, is seeking markets for its excess products, is seeking employment for its surplus labor, and is seeking natural resources for its hungry industries. As far as the purveyors of this fake news and what I also call fake scholarship, which is hand in hand with the fake news, as far as these people are concerned, the mountains of evidence against these claims might as well not exist. That is not the least reason why events like this are critically important. We need to remind ourselves and the rest of the world that the international relations of our world can be conducted, have been conducted, and are being conducted by socialist countries in a way that are radically different from and indeed opposed to the history of bloody imperialism of the capitalist countries. So with this, I'd like to welcome you all here. I'd like to welcome all our speakers, and just a couple of housekeeping matters. We will have all the speakers in turn, beginning with Booker, who we are going to give a bit more time to since he's our chief guest here. So we hope he'll speak for between 20 and 30 minutes. And then we will have the other speakers speaking for about 7 to 8 minutes each. Some of them are still on their way, so hopefully they will be here soon, but I will ask the speakers one after another. So without, and at the end of that, if there's time, we would love to have a bit of question and answer and discussion. So Booker, and I should say Booker Ngesa Omole is National Vice-Person and National Organizing Secretary of the Communist Party of Kenya. So Booker, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me to make this speech. Maybe I could make a few preliminary remarks before I can get into my presentation. First and foremost, I feel very at home among comrades. I feel very warm, even though I'm in the belly of the beast. But I feel very comradely amongst you. And some of you, I have gotten an opportunity to interact with you people at a very personal level. And maybe I should not go far without saying that at least during my visit to China, I got an opportunity to meet Comrade George. And that is how the string has come to this historic place. After that, I meet Comrade Keith from the Friends of Socialist China. And in Cuba, I also met Jonathan White. And then I met Jyoti Bra. Then now I come here to share with you my thinking. And also to tell you that probably not really that I know much, but learning is a dialectical process. So we are going to relate and learn from each other's, at least social experiences. Because, you know, all knowledge come from social practice and experience. So probably our experiences in Kenya and also in Africa are much different from your experiences. So if we can build on those experiences, then we can move this great agenda, the anti-imperialist agenda. So, comrades and friends, this particular topic, it's at the center of the debate, not just among the left, but also in the reactionary spaces. So we have to clarify, the position of China as revolutionaries and as progressives. So I am very grateful that I'm here to at least share with you a few of my thinking on China and the rise of Global South. And when I was preparing for this presentation, people ask, why is it that the Global South has remained backward? Is it because their leaders are lazy? Is it because their climate is not right? Is it because they are bewitched? There are so many questions that are being asked why really Africa has remained a backward country. And of course, China is rising. So if we can answer those questions in a very historical way, then we can try to at least jointly and collectively figure out what the future of the global communist movement is. So I will go to my presentation and probably answer some of your questions and also ask you some of the questions as we continue with this forum this evening. So, esteemed comrades, at least before you today, I am representing the Communist Party of Kenya. And I must also admit that the Communist Party of Kenya has its own challenges, just like the communist movement in Britain. Probably you have better ways to resolve our problems. We also have some other ways to resolve our problems. Maybe today we'll share experiences and learn from one another. There is also a concept that sometimes is difficult to understand, especially for people that do not come from Africa, especially the concept of Pan-Africanism. So probably I will also use this opportunity to explain our thinking about Pan-Africanism. So another organization that I represent that goes with the initial PASA, it's Pan-African Socialist Alliance. So those are the two organizations that I represent today. But it's also important that I tell you, from the bottom of my heart about the struggles of the Communist Party of Kenya. Because if I don't tell you, then where could I be looking for answer? Because this is a comradely talk. Remember, some of the questions that the communists continue to grapple with is whether to take part in bourgeois elections or not. And even if you agree to take part in bourgeois elections, the next question is that should you form coalitions with bourgeois political parties? That was the major question in 2022 that brought several debates in the Communist Party of Kenya that led to a split between the majority and the minority. It is also it should be clear that I am here to represent the majority faction of the Communist Party of Kenya and not the minority factions that currently serve under the leadership of the Comprado class under President Samoei Ruto in Kenya. In fact, we are not just saying that this split, you could look at it. There is always positive and negative side. It's never all positive or negative. Because maybe we say that many comrades globally ask us, Booker, why don't you unite? But then my answer to them, what use will be a united Communist Party of Kenya to the working class if it is only based on opportunism and revisionism? and cutting deals with the ruling class. So in that aspect, I think the split, was a good thing. Because just like your body is only alive because the cells continue to multiply and the bad ones die and the good ones actually thrive. So in that sense, we see the split as a strength and not as something that we should cry about. But on the negative side also, we must admit that a united Communist Party of Kenya that represent the working class of Kenya, it's more stronger than, two factions of the Communist Party. But we think that this split will bring another enriched unity because you can divide and then come up with another new unity that is, more revolutionary. And I could give you an example because this has happened in our party. In 2013, we had the Youth League of the party. At that time, the Young Communist League. But comrades, when, they traveled, they got influenced by certain movements like the Green Movement, and they came to the party and decided, with a different thinking in the party. So they separated and formed the Revolutionary Socialist League. But 7 years, has gone, but they are back again with us to now discuss even a more enriched unity. So what I wanted to underscore that sometimes divisions are inevitable, but they are not bad in themselves. Only how revolutionary treat those divisions. That is my first preliminary comment that I wanted to make, comrades. The second part, of course, is the Pan-African Socialist Alliance. When you talk about, and this we have seen it differently, even when we interact with some of the comrades from the global north, especially the question of class and race. Which one is the primacy? Sometimes, especially when you are from a country where racism is institutionalized, you think that now the white, red and black is the primary contradiction. So such thinking also exists within the Pan-Africanist movement. But for us as revolutionaries, I think our duty is to try to clarify. And even when we clarify, we don't say that our position is right, because today's position can be enriched, further. But Pan-African Socialist Alliance is actually a revolutionary movement. Just because that at the continental level, we still lack the vanguard of the proletariat. This is still the case in the global level. We cannot say that we have a vanguard of the global proletariat at the moment, but there are, baby steps, different steps that are heading towards that objective reality. Just to clarify, for us, we think that even though we have a shared history within the African continent, but a united, liberated, free Africa, we don't envision it like the unity of Europe that is built, on plunder of other countries. We actually envision a united, free, liberated Africa as an objective. But the software that runs that unity is indeed scientific socialism. That is our position. Comrades, I also got the opportunity. Of course, I traveled today. I left Nairobi and I had a stopover in Addis Ababa and about some 22 hours, and I arrived in Paris. And maybe from Paris to London, I came. But also last year, I also traveled to China. And I got an opportunity to travel to China at least 2 times. Probably it's also good that I tell you my experiences. At least I will not say that I am, an expert on China issues. But I think I can tell you my observation. But the debate about what China is or what it should be, it's an ongoing debate that we cannot monopolize. We can continue to debate about that. But when I was traveling here, maybe Kate was very worried that maybe my visa processes will not allow me to come to this process. But the visa process to come to London is highly commercialized, really. In fact, I had a short time to process my visa to come here. So the computer, I could not speak to anyone, so I had to communicate to the computer, And then they asked me, Buka, do you want to apply for an express visa? Then I said, yes. Then they tell you, okay, pay £500. And then they tell you, do you want to book an appointment? Do you want to choose the time of your appointment? Then they tell you, pay such amount. And then they tell you, I had to apply for 2 visas, the Schengen visa to go to Paris, and then apply for the UK visa. So they asked me, do you want to keep your passport? Then they say, pay this to keep your passport. So it's a very highly, commercialized process. But it is different when I was applying for my visa to China. If you missed, China in Nairobi when you apply for a visa, you just go and do a normal application. And sometimes if you forget a document, they will photocopy it for you there and give you. But for this TS contact guys, they will tell you, go back and reschedule your appointment. So that is the kind of simple experiences that probably all of us see when you interact with people or institutions or systems. But let me go further and say that I think there are certain also concepts that that we need to probably interrogate in detail, because the debate in the public square has been dominated by mainly the Western logic. But what about the Chinese or the African logic? It's important for us to try and bring certain things into perspective. But I will say that in my 2 visits to China, first of all, I will say that in my own analysis, whatever you want to call the Chinese system is way more superior than the Western system, than the United States system. But its character we may debate about. But in terms of even its social, economic, and political system, and the reasons why I say that they are, when you are feeding on mainly corporate propaganda, even the concept of racism, we are told that the Chinese racism and Western racism, but I think there is a difference in my thinking, because Chinese racism, actually the Chinese authority do not tolerate it. They discourage and even punish it. While in the United States, it is institutionalized. It forms a privileged class. Just because you are white, you're privileged in the United States. But, from Africa, we have developed a thick skin. If you don't have powers and you're a racist, we don't care. But if you have powers and it can actually influence, to make certain decisions that actually will compromise our dignity, then we have to resist it. But, I was also very happy that I could speak, especially young Chinese people could speak some proficient English and debate about, certain issues within Beijing Street, while I was, conditioned that China was particularly a closed society and basically only carrying out a genocide against the Muslim community. While even in the hotel I saw an halal place where the Muslim people could actually, enjoy their delicacies. So what I'm trying to put across, that without interrogating and critically thinking, especially the dominating ideas of the United States propaganda and the so-called civilized West, it can make you, hate certain people that you're not meant to even hate before even meeting them. Remember, we are told that the Chinese goods and services are fake before even using them. So you should just sit in Kenya and wait for fake products to come. So such is how the propaganda works. But allow me to revisit, I made a commentary in 2017 when I was asked to give a few comments on what is the difference between Africa-China relationship and, of course, the Western governments. When I say the Western, I mean the ruling class, the ruling elite. What is the difference in that kind of relationship? And this is what I had to say in 2017. The partnership, particularly the partnership between China and Kenya, as well as Africa at large, has not spurred remarkable infrastructural development, but has not only spurred remarkable infrastructural development, but has also fostered a genuine cultural exchange between Chinese and African communities. It has provided Africans with first-hand insights into Chinese culture, dispelling the half-truths and misinformation perpetuated against China and its people, often propagated globally by Western media outlets like CNN, BBC, and Fox News. Moreover, this relationship has highlighted an alternative approach to engaging the development partners and international capital. Unlike the United States and Western nations, which have historically imposed detrimental policies on African nations through institutions like IMF and World Bank, such as the infamous structural adjustment plans known as SARBs, China has adopted a policy of non-interference in the internal affairs of sovereign countries. This shift has spared African nations from the suffering and the hardship inflicted by such destructive policies. That was in 2017. But also another notable aspect in the projects that is being done by our Chinese partners. Another notable aspect is the efficiency with which the projects are executed. Previously, bureaucratic red tape and exorbitant cost often prolonged project timelines, sometimes spanning several years before ground activities commence. However, with the influx of Chinese investment, Africa has witnessed a swift turnaround. Projects are now executed promptly, delivering high-quality results. This stands in stark contrast to the portrayal by Western media, which often dismisses products and projects from China and Russia as inferior before their arrival. These words remain true today, even though the attitude of the ruling class in the global north towards the Chinese socialist experiment remains unchanged more than 5 years later. So the second part of my presentation mainly is to try and look at the root cause of African problems and how we can design solutions. And why do we say that what has made China to rise, because maybe some of you will accept and some of you will not accept, but the truth is China is the de facto leader of the global south at the moment. And it's playing an important role in challenging, the hegemony of the dominance class in the United States, who actually, unfortunately, the politicians in Europe cannot make their decisions. They are actually, I think, just another colonial entity because they have to rely on, the United States, Joe Biden's, to dictate for them what to do in Europe, just like you can see in the case of the proxy war in Ukraine. So the challenges facing the global south are actually vast, encompassing socioeconomic and political issues. But the truth of the matter that these socio-political problems that are facing Africa are systemic. They are not based on just, what they want to call bad decision by Black people. They are actually colonial and neo-colonial, systems that actually subjugate the African economies to the economies of the metropole. This is something that has been problematic, especially for, the bourgeois intellectuals, or what we call the pink economists that try to only analyze the failures of the African socioeconomic system only from the African, trajectory, but not forgetting the unequal relationship that takes place between the African economies and the countries of the metropole. In factually, in actual sense, those relationships are not just exploitative, but some of these African leaders or leaders of the global South are only puppets of Western governments. While geopolitical unrest and interventions, this concept of a liberal democracy that is mainly manufacturing war in the global South. If you tell me you want to export a democracy, and comrades, then we have to critically think, what is this democracy that they want to export to us? And they tell us, China is a dictatorship. But don't you think the United States is a dictatorship of capital? Any billionaire, foolish bigot can actually be a United States politician. It's no. So it's important for us to actually interrogate when we talk about liberal democracy, because even today in Kenya, we continue to reflect that several people martyred in the streets of Nairobi. And for a moment, there was a fight between the British, the colonial British, and the United States in our own land. This clash was because of economic interest. And even though the British government was supporting the one-party dictatorship at that time, which was dictator Moi, but the United States challenging the dominance of the British, the classical British in our country, in the name of democracy, it was, they say that we want a multi-party democracy in Kenya, but without communism. So what democracy is that? So the fight was mainly of the United States capital to actually subjugate the Kenyan economy, but really not to export this, what is called, so-called liberal democracy. Actually, in Kenya today, if you don't have money and you don't have a chance to participate in the bourgeois democratic processes, because it's actually really money laundering process. During an election time, you try and, just continue to give money to the poor people. And then you try to get back your money like in a casino, through, corruption and cutting deals. Such cannot be a perfect system that we can be told that United States is concerned about Kenya today. But at least from, the attitude of the Chinese logic towards democracy is that we have to, if we want to improve the quality of our democracy, then people have to make decisions, not just on who has the money, but also based on meritocracy. One time I was, I'm a trained engineer, so I was working with a Chinese carpenter, and sometimes it's a joke in our country. So the normal Kenyan people ask these Chinese, but you cannot vote in your country. Then I was very intrigued by his reply, because he said that, why shouldn't I vote? I'm a carpenter, but my daughter and my son is in the political school, will make good decisions for my country. But if you have any questions about carpentry, please feel free to ask that question, which I felt was very fascinating in the sense that, we could actually get somebody in the level of the carpenter to give such a sound response to people who are attacking him that he does not have a right to vote, while this right to vote is basically rigged from the start. I'm just being told I have 5 minutes to go, and I'm not just halfway on my speech. Maybe I'll ask the coordinators to add me a bit, maybe 7 more minutes so that I wrap up my presentation. Yeah. So let me go to imperialism, because this is also an important topic. Maybe some of you would like to say that China is an imperialist country, Russia is an imperialist country. Some of you, maybe some people still say everybody is an imperialist country. Every capitalist is an imperialist country. But I think that we can go to the scientific definition of imperialism. But let us see the possibility that China actually gives to the global anti-imperialist movement at this moment. For us, we think that China has a very important position. Even for those who are thinking that, wrongfully thinking that China is an imperialist country, then the next question they should ask themselves, which is the primary enemy at the moment? Because we cannot continue saying this is bad, this is bad. Because in the national agenda in Kenya, we isolate the primary enemy and mobilizes all forces to defeat the primary enemy. At least in that way, we can get to the next level of the struggle. But if we keep on accusing every person, then we think that we cannot move forward. So for us in our thinking is that the primary enemy in the world today is United States imperialism, in whose ruins a new society will be birthed, in whose ruins a new society will blossom. So the defeat of the United States dominance class and the empire will actually accelerate the people's camps, the communist camp. So we even admire, maybe we could say, why do we admire the Chinese socialist, experiment? Because China has been accused of all sorts of things, but why do we continue to admire China and Chinese socialist experiment? Remember, after independence, all the colonized countries, they only chose 2 options. There are colonized countries that after independence, they chose the neoliberal, position of the United States and the so-called civilized West. But then there is the other camp that chose to build their internal productive forces and develop their own path away from the neoliberal. That is what accounts for the success in the Chinese socialist experiment and no other. Remember, if you're talking about population, look at India. If you're talking about geography, so it is about this, what path did that country take after it gained independence? In our opinion, we think those countries that took the socialist path and rejected the neoliberal, path of the United States and the so-called civilized West are actually on the right trajectory. And today, we were discussing, in the plane when I was coming here on how is it possible that who will lead the anti-imperialist camp, especially in the current circumstances? Remember, in the United Nations Security Council, DPRK has been a punching bag there. And sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes China and Russia support sanctions, of DPRK. But now with the current circumstances, that now Russia has been slapped by the same unilateral sanctions and coercive measures, then we see that at least at the United Nations, the DPRK has been able to attract the support of Russia and China. And if the war breaks out, who will fight to the inevitable conclusion, at least to the revolutionary conclusion? Maybe we may have different positions on that, but in our analysis, we think that when, some of the problems that we think, maybe you who live in Europe probably have a better idea, but as some of the problems we think that face the anti-war movement, mainly in Europe, is pacifism, because probably some of them has not realized that war is the highest level of contradiction in the society. And after the war, nothing actually remains the same. So we do not fear war. In fact, if we can turn civil or world war into a revolutionary war, then we should unite to actually advance that war. But we must not fall short, for example, in Kenya, to tribal, ethnic, warlords that is currently taking place, for example, in Sudan. For example, at least we are glad that French imperialism is being defeated every day in the Sahel region. We had some of the United States politicians, after the events in the West Africa, they started saying that, we do not want coups. It was laughable that they want to support only democratic government. But these people who tells us that they want to support democratic government, are they not the people who only support coups when those coups are on their interest? So the Communist Party of Kenya actually issued a statement in solidarity with those coups. In fact, we say that coups are not just coups. They are coups that are anti-imperialist, like what we are seeing in Burkina Faso, in Niger, in Mali. But also there are coups that, like the one we saw in Libya. So we must be able to critically think and to advance, because for us in the people's camp, our duty is to be able to move this struggle from one level to the other. And that basically means forming tactical and strategic alliances to advance this struggle. Even though we must never fall for either right-wing opportunism or left-wing opportunism, because left-wing opportunism, then we tend to be Puritans, that, we are the vanguard of the working class. We cannot form alliances with the others. We may fall in the era of what the Trotskyists, fell when they, opposed, alliances, to defeat the fascism in Europe, or even the right wing, where some people want to even form tactical alliances with our primary enemy. For example, in the neo-colonial global South, some people want to form tactical alliances with the comprado class. That is foolishness, because how will you form a tactical alliance with the primary enemy that you seek to defeat? How will you form, for example, tactical alliances with the US imperialism? You will be slaughtered. So in that case, I will want to probably wrap up my presentation by trying to clarify maybe 2 or 3 concepts, then I will finalize. The first concept, which I already talked about, and I will read it in excerpt so that we move forward. In the Western liberal democracy, concepts such as freedom, human rights, it's only talk, but the conditions is like somebody say, you are free to own land in any part of United Kingdom, but without money, how will you own land? You are actually, living in abstract. And even issues to do with human rights. When you are walking in dirty streets, for example, you're not living in a dignified house. You don't have a job, but you're allowed to run your mouth dry about, human rights. How is it possible that such circumstances, especially now that the United States is on the decline? Last time I visited Athens, for example, I could see several homeless people. And even now when I was coming here, I see several homeless people. So how is it possible to just say that you can talk about issues to do with freedom, you talk about human rights? So those concepts, I think, China has actually been able to advance them, and we can continue to debate about them. So, comrades, I have 0 minutes left. Maybe in future we could talk about this center periphery dependency. It's also another concept that I would have loved to speak about. And even you probably must have had this absurd accusation of the debt trap strategy towards the African countries. I would have loved to say that, because most of the debts in the African continent at the moment are with the Paris Club, are with the IMF, are with the World Bank, So such concepts, we could continue to actually crystallize our mind around them after this meeting and talk about even the certain similarities between African objective reality and the Chinese set goals. I have made certain comparisons that I will share my speech with you in regard to the African Union, for example, Agenda 2063, the China-African Vision 2035. I have also tried to clarify about the thinking about the global community of shared future, which, if you get time, please, I will share with you my speech to read through it. After those many remarks, comrade, I would just say, long live socialism, long live the Friends of Socialist China, long live the Communist Party of Kenya, and I wish you, a good time and debates today. I hope I will.
Thank you. Thank you, Comrade Booker, for those very inspiring and I think very interesting remarks, insightful remarks. So thank you very much. Now we will have, I think, 4 speakers, each with about 7 to 8 minutes each. And Booker, if you may just pass this along gently to the next speaker. Our next speaker is Frank Murray of, my mistake. My next speaker is Fiona Sim of the Black Liberation Alliance, organizer, and she's also organizer with Goldsmiths Anti-Imperialist Society, and a member of the Friends of Socialist China Britain Committee. So Fiona, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Radhika. It's such a great honor to be included in this panel here today, alongside our esteemed comrade from the Communist Party of Kenya and all these wonderful organizers and activists. And there is nothing more powerful than being united in struggle with comrades who are not only just from across the diaspora, but from across the globe. And it is a reminder of the importance of internationalist, anti-imperialist solidarity that transcends borders and bureaucracy. Our struggles are, as you know, connected by the chains of imperialist domination and sown from the seeds of destruction left by colonial conquest. But our joint history, our joint struggle stretches back centuries further. At a time when Europe was in its so-called dark ages, Africa, Asia, and the Islamic world were experiencing their golden age. At this time, the renowned Chinese Muslim navigator Zhong He led expeditions along the ancient Silk Road, with voyages as far as East Africa, touching down on land now known as Kenya, where the sea connecting the 2 continents would, then go on to establish trade routes and friendly relations. Fast forward a few centuries, we've now got the Silk Road-inspired One Belt, One Road initiative, where we are seeing the rebirth of Africa-China relations and the re-establishment of South-South cooperation at an unprecedented scale. We see that Kenya is actually China's #1 trade partner in East Africa. We see that South Africa and China are collaborating to build a research base on the moon. And the coup governments formed in the Sahel after the uprisings were quick to establish relations with a socialist China, reiterated their policy of non-interference and non-intervention in African politics. Burkina Faso's president even declared that it considered China an important trade partner early on, and Niger's interim president general has reportedly met with the Central and North African representative for BRICS in just the last few weeks. It is here we see from African leaders themselves, from the working classes themselves who have chosen to go down the path of uprisings, where their hearts lie and where they feel their relationship with China is. And it's one that it's not just like the West, a relationship that is not built on the history of plunder and pillage, like in the global South. The West has seen this and it is scared. It has seen that Africa has taken a great interest in the rise of China, especially in the last few decades, and the West is running scared. It's scared that its playbook of colonial extraction and political profiteering is no longer going to work in its former colonies. And let us be clear, the West sees China as a threat to its hegemony, not just because of the relations it's forming all across the global South, but because it cannot conceive that China, a country whose GDP was in the lowest 10 countries in the world less than a century ago, is now a global powerhouse that rivals the US. As our comrade was saying, China's rise is something that is being witnessed by everyone and agreed all across the world. Its GDP has been increasing at an average of 9% a year since the 1990s. In fact, China is actually considered an outlier in world economics. It is one of the world's largest economies that, unlike its rank mates, such as the US and UK, it is not a so-called open and democratic society. This is frightening to the West. It cannot fathom how a developing nation like China could have possibly done all this, all the while lifting over 800 million people out of absolute poverty, without rigging the system as it had done for centuries through colonialism. We must remember in all these narratives we're hearing about China, that it is Europe who is the one who sent Nigeria millions in near expired COVID vaccines, not China. Remember, it was France who sends French guards to steal, essentially, and escort Senegal's gold back to Paris in France, not China. Remember, it is the US, the United States, who recently has been suspending millions in food aid to Ethiopia and holding food ransom from starving communities, not China. And as the late, great Thomas Sankara spoke wisely with regards to the concept of aid and what aid can do. Those who come, as he said, those who come with wheat, willets, and corn, they're not here to help us. Those who really want to help us give us plows, tractors, fertilizers. And it's through even economists who are by no means socialists or Marxists or at all even interested in a socialist economics, that people such as Dambisa Moyo have written books such as Dead Aid, which actually illustrates the ineffectiveness of the billions of aid and structural adjustment programs poured into the African continent every year. Even the greatest of economists will tell you that there is a trend of negative growth in where all this aid is invested. But this is also why we get narratives of debt traps and so-called Chinese imperialism. These debt trap narratives detracts from the fact that the aid development model, the so-called aid that the West spends billions pouring into the continent every year, is a failing model. But what isn't a failing model, and what has shown that there is an alternative, is China's relations with African countries through the One Belt and One Road initiative. And now the One Belt, One Road initiative is pivoted to be a program of win-win cooperation, a program to develop the global South through infrastructure and trade deals from Asia to Africa to Latin America. And of course, yes, there is debt involved. That's not something that can be denied. But as our comrade said, it's very different. It's a very different kind of debt. It is not the debt that, the colonial debt that has been unwillingly imposed on a country. It is countries making deals, and you'd hope, according to the governments, that they are for the good of the people. However, we must remember that China does not impose political conditions onto each country it trades with. It relies on the countries to be able to work through their own contradictions, and it does not make its relationship with them dependent on whether or not they are, great revolutionaries or communists or the same ideology as China. And as a result, it also means that China's debt has some of the lowest rates, no political strings attached, and eventually has led to growth. There is evidence for this in China's mass infrastructural programs across the global south, because it is trade and not just aid, so-called aid, that is a crucial part of any country's development. The alternative that China offers is one that does not patronize its African counterparts. It does not operate as a charity, but nor as a loan shark. China has become Africa's largest trading partner with a total trade volume of over $170 billion as of 2017. And even the World Economic Forum admits there is a correlation between this and the fact that the Africa-China partnership could actually be the 21st century's most powerfully transformative economic relationship. So yes, a rising China and a rising Africa, this is doubly frightening to the imperialist powers. It is a precursor to the fall of Western hegemony itself. And so the organization I'm a co-founder of, the Black Liberation Alliance, we believe in the unity of all peoples of African, Arab, Asian, Caribbean, and other indigenous descent. We have all been subordinated by centuries of racism and imperialism that dehumanizes us. But now we face a world where the stakes are high, as the West stoked the potential World War III, whilst it allows a climate breakdown to run rampant, and it tries to issue a new Cold War on China. But it is the rising global South that holds the hope that the Black Liberation Alliance stands for, an equal, just, and fair world, where we can overcome and overthrow the chains of imperialism and capitalism that are holding us hostage and holding us back. And it is within the interests of all anti-imperialists to defeat the disinformation drive against China and oppose the new Cold War, so much as it is to support the uprisings in the Sahel against French imperialism and against neo-colonial rule all across Africa. And remember, if they cannot divide us, then they cannot conquer us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fiona. That was really great. I think also very important. I should have added earlier that Frank Murray sends his regrets. He was unable to make it today, but hopefully he will be at promises at the next Friends of Socialist China meeting. So our next speaker is Alex Gordon, president of the RMT and chair of the Marx Memorial Library.
I'll speak from here.
Okay. I think it should be all right. The speaker is there.
There's a lot of speakers. So I just want to first of all say it's a great pleasure to welcome Friends of Socialist China to the Marx Memorial Library, and particularly Booker, and to have the opportunity to show you some of the archives in this institution, which are archives of the liberation movements and the working class movements of the world. So I'm just going to make a couple of remarks in response to what Booker had said and Fiona. And I think that the end of that moment of unipolar US power, the swagger of the post-Soviet space is beyond doubt now. We're 10 years into the collapse of unipolarism. And if you want one symbolic moment which encapsulates that, it must be the South African advocates at the International Court of Justice stepping up to make the indictment of Israel for its genocide against the Palestinian people. And the fact that this is a country that's liberated itself through armed struggle, through support from the international movements, and the fact that it's a country which is prepared to use the word apartheid against Israel, from a position of its experience of that struggle and overcoming that oppression, I think has been more than anything the sort of symbolic break with the consciousness of unipolarism, which still infects the minds of many people in what is known as the global West. It's breaking down, and it's breaking down in their heads, and it's breaking down in places like the International Court of Justice. But it's also breaking down in the fundamental relationships, the economic relationships taking place in the world today. And so when Fiona's talking about the fake news about, and you're talking about the fake news about Chinese fake goods, about low quality Chinese technology, about the Chinese stealing Western technology, which is the narrative which is discussed in the media and by politicians in the global West. You can really see this breaking down now. The reality is that people in this country were stopped from having access to Chinese telephone communication products. They were stopped from getting Huawei phones because the United States and European companies wanted to prevent competition. So from the neoliberals who for 35 years have preached the gospel of competitive wages, that trade creates value, another complete shibboleth, a complete falsehood, the idea that value is created by trade rather than by labor, right? All of that, all of those lies, which they've been preaching for 35 years, are now coming home to haunt them. They're now engaged in a huge protectionist push to shut down, to impose sanctions on Russia, impose sanctions on China, on Chinese steel, on Chinese new technology goods, all in the name of trying to protect their markets. And you can see the impact. This is the real world that is emerging here and now. You can see this in the One Belt, One Road initiative, which Fiona referred to, where the logistics chains of world trade are being completely reshaped at the moment, completely reshaped. While the Americans and the British send warplanes to bomb Yemen to try to take out Houthis who are stopping commercial shipping in the Red Sea in a clear demonstration of their solidarity with the people in Gaza. The fact is that the real logistic chains and supply chains of the world economy are being completely reshaped, and they're being reshaped predominantly by the investments made by China. So you can see the new ports that are being invested in Bangladesh, in Pakistan. You can see the new ports that are being invested in Africa, in East Africa. You can see the new Chinese investments in West Africa. You can see the Belt and Road Initiative completely reshaping world trade. And the only answer that the power brokers in Washington and their loyal lapdogs in London and the European capitals have got is to demand further economic sanctions. And I would almost guarantee in the next few weeks and months, we're going to see calls for military action against China, ramping up imperialism, the military threat against China. Why? Well, one reason is because they've lost their proxy war in Ukraine, and they're now going to have to move on to the next war. And you can see that argument will be played out in the next few months during the American US presidential elections and in the British general election, which will be taking place almost at the same time. And that argument will be between the faction who want to fight Russia and China and those who want to prioritize the fight against China. And so, this is they've created this absolute hell And we shouldn't be, we shouldn't be facetious about this. The fact is that the level of public spending that we're being called upon to push into arms manufacturing now in the West is going to create hundreds of thousands of more orphans, more dead and injured populations around the world. This money that we're being demanded that Western economies should put into armaments production is something that we as a movement need to take a stand against. And if there's one area where I think the anti-imperialist movement in the West, in the global West, in this country, in European countries, and in the United States need to target, it's this demand that we should be spending a higher proportion of GDP on armaments production, on research and development, on weapons which will be used against the global South and against countries that have the cheek to stand up against US imperialism and their servants in the EU. So our message from here is that we're very pleased that you've come to speak to us, Booker. We hope you'll come back. We hope you'll send comrades from your party to London, come to visit the Marx Memorial Library. We'll give you a very warm welcome, and we want to learn from your discussions in Kenya and develop, as you say, a higher understanding through those discussions. So thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex. Our next speaker is Cecil Guzmore. Cecil is a veteran Pan-African community activist and a historian. So Cecil, please go ahead. And if we can just move the microphone.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to have been asked, even though I'm not quite sure why the honor was extended. I am interested in the perspective, and I'm glad it was just said that I'm a historian. I want to rely on memory to raise some issues. I see that the topic is Africa, China, and the rise of the global South. And the difference between Africa and China is very important. The difference is that China isn't where it is accidentally. It's there because over 3 or 4 decades, there was a revolution that drove imperialism lock, stock, and barrel from China and enabled China to organize itself in its own interest. Nothing of the sort happened in continental Africa. Our history is that a whole series of our localities, Africa is a place of 50-odd countries. It's a continent fundamentally disunited. And the disunity arose from the fact that our struggle focused fundamentally on colonialism and not on imperialism. It matters that in 1963, when there was discussion about African unity, there was already in continental Africa a majority of leaders fully committed, a massive majority of them fully committed to the image of Africa that the West had devised in 1884 and 1885 at the Congress of Berlin. And the institution that they then set up against the advice of Kwame Nkrumah, who was reaching back to what Marcus Garvey had been saying since 1914. So the institution that they set up, and the name change doesn't matter, was the institutionalization of neo-colonialism in Africa. And it matters that we understand that. It's great to hear my comrade from Kenya, and in my memory, part of my own coming into political awareness was actually something to do with the struggle of the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, which is people are still calling Mau Mau. And that's one of the features of my 1950s youth. And it matters that we understand, incidentally, a figure of some interest at the time was none other than Kenyatta, the fly whisk wielding, subsequently genuinely neo-colonial brute of a leader. Now, we can deceive ourselves about the global South. Of course, the global South is a reality. If the global South is to work, it has to work on class lines. And there is no class organization that links and unites the global South. And it matters that is the case. It matters that Africa is a collection of neo-colonies. It matters that the countries that we're putting our hopes in at the moment, the Sahel countries, give it time. We do not know how that is to go. The important thing about what is happening there is not that there are progressive coups, but that the coups clearly have some support amongst the masses. That's the difference between types of coups. But it's a long way to go. Chairman Mao was once asked about the French Revolution. He said it's too early to judge. It's important that we remember that the West reverses apparent victories. I'm old enough to remember the Bandung moment. And in the place that Bandung was perhaps the capital of, the West arranged for the murder of between 500,000 and 600,000 people, the Sukarno moment, the Suharto, and so on. And in this moment, let us be clear what is happening. The West is already engaged in creating a war against China. And it isn't, contrary to what's being said here, that they are fearful. The West invents fears over things that they're absolutely not afraid of. They are busy. And my point about class unity comes in here. They are busy creating war conditions against China, not because they are fearful of China, but because the Chinese are not white. It's a racist drive that they are engaged in relation to China. They cannot bear the notion that a country based on a people's revolution and not white is in danger of being the leading country in the world. Now, when we say that there is not class unity in the third world, let us remember what is happening with China. Let us remember that an India led by Hindu fascists is part of an alliance against China. Let us remember that Japan, which was responsible for the murder of 30 million Chinese, is in an alliance against Japan. Let us remember that countries that the West was saying are China, they are now arming and saying that China doesn't have any right to be united with them. Those countries once occupied in the United Nations the Security Council seat of China. And suddenly the West is saying, and they're doing other things as well. They've just given, although we haven't bothered to notice, nuclear arms to Australia. That's what's in those submarines that they've given to them. So we need a proper analysis of our world. And let us praise South Africa for its support of the Palestinian people. Great. But let us remember who the ANC are. For the last 10 years, we have been on little demonstrations at the South African embassy against the Marikana murder, where all that was happening in South Africa was that some miners were saying, we need a living wage. And between a combination, the man who organized it is now president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, and that shooting down death of 30 odd people and another number leading up to about 100 people. That's who we're dealing with. So welcome their stance at the moral and legal level for the Palestinian people, but don't forget who they are. Don't forget what's actually happening in South Africa. Don't forget what is happening to ordinary South African people, squatters, people who are fighting against foreign companies that the government is supporting and have the ANC's people killing the people who are. It's a long and complicated story. So in the matter of China, Africa, and the Global South, the Global South is a reality, only if it's a class reality. And we see what can happen, for example, in Brazil, the difference between Lula and the person who succeeded him. He's back there, but what is going to happen in Brazil? And India, big part of the Global South, what is the politics of India? In South Africa, what is the politics of that place? Only the other day, Ramaphosa was here, hobnobbing with the very, I mean, I won't bother to try to characterize them. I'm not for being romantic about what is actually happening in our world. I'm not for approaching our world without a clear and firm class analysis. And I'm not for not understanding that there is something presently wrong, not with Marxist theory, but with Marxist practice. And that in Africa, as well as here, the workers' movement is in genuine difficulty and problems. And that's one of the things that we have to focus on. What is the practice, right? Marx's revolution included the notion that it is practice that proves theory. And right now, the theory is in trouble, not because the theory is in trouble as theory, but because the practice is in real difficulty worldwide. Here, in France, in Greece, in South Africa, in those Sahel countries, and so on. And that's what we have to understand and be mobilizing around. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Cecil. And our final speaker today is Roger McKenzie, foreign editor of Morning Star. So please go ahead, Roger. And
I'm founding editor, I'm not that old.
I'm sorry.
I know I feel old, but I'm not that old. Comrades, I mean, the good thing, I mean, it's usually a really big privilege to be asked to be the final speaker at a great event, but not when everybody's said everything already. So what I'm going to do is tell a story. And it's a story of a man who falls down a well. And he's shouting, he's going, help, I need help. And this bloke comes along and looks down the well. And he said, what's up? You could get out of there yourself. I said anyway.
So
Carry on.
we missed about 20 seconds.
Yeah, it was the crucial 20 seconds.
So sorry.
So anyway, I'm down to the final person who comes along. And so the guy's still calling out, help, help, help. And this final person comes along and said, help me, help me, help me. And the guy jumps in the well. Oh, what the hell are you doing? I need help. He said, don't worry. I've been down here before and I know the way out. And that for me is the relationship between China and Africa. Because any country that can bring 800 million people out of poverty knows the way out. Because when I look at Africa now, north, south, east and west of Africa, in the centre of Africa, and I see some of the problems that I'm writing about every day in the Morning Star, which if you don't subscribe to, what the hell are you doing? And it's time you did. But when I see some of those issues right the way across the continent, all the issues that the comrades have talked about in terms of the way that the continent has been pillaged by people and are still pillaging the continent, still doing it right in front of our eyes. They're making up all sorts of excuses about why it's in the best interests of these people who are crying out for help, why it's in the best interests of these people who are crying out for help but haven't got any food to eat, while they're pillaging the continent that is suffering under the climate emergency that we're all facing. But it's their own fault. And if only they listened to these leaders who know what is so much better for us, apparently. And this is really my point, is that people on the continent of Africa, in fact, people across the diaspora, are fed up with these people telling us what's good for us and telling us how it's our fault as people of African descent, wherever we are in the world, that it's our fault for whatever happens to us and not their fault for having pillaged the continent in the first place. So analysis is really, really important. That's what makes meetings like this so important, that we've got to get all this information together and all this information from people who are willing to come out on a Saturday afternoon and listen to this stuff. But we need more than that, because, comrades, this is also a time for organisers, because we have to go out and talk to people who wouldn't dream of coming to a Saturday evening meeting because they're watching, I don't know, Man City play, whoever they're playing or whatever, or they want to go to the pub or a disco or whatever. Do people still go to discos? I don't know. Whatever that people want to do on a Saturday, right? But we have to be the ones who are taking these discussions, taking these arguments out into the workplaces, out into the communities, to people who haven't heard some of these things that we've talked about this evening, some of the things that we might take for granted. I'm betting most of the things that we've talked about, so I saw you all nodding, right? But they're quite familiar to all of us. But if we don't commit from today to take these things out into our trade unions, into our communities, and have these sometimes quite difficult conversations with people, and they're difficult because of the propaganda that's being waged about what's happening to about what China is allegedly doing, but also what is going on in Africa as well, north, south, east and west and middle, all of it, right? And that's the task that we've got. So these meetings are dead important. These exchanges are really important, and we need to find ways of making sure there's a lot more of these exchanges. But we've got to commit to going out and having those tough conversations with people. If we don't, then this is great, and I love you all, and I'll give up a Saturday and come and have a chat with you anytime, right? You might not want to listen, but I'll come and have a chat with you anyway. But we've got to take this stuff out and engage with people with some of the things that we talked about this evening. And we've got to make sure that they're activated into action as well. And we've got to grow the number of people who are prepared to not just listen to us, but be prepared to take the discussions out with their families as well. They're watching the news, they're looking at, crap newspapers, and they're not looking at the Morning Star, unfortunately, every day, and watching the great stuff that I personally write every day, right? But what they're doing is they've got the Telegraph and the Mail and the Express and what they call the Guardian of all, the worst of all, right? They're exposed to that stuff every single day. So we've got a tough task, comrades, a really tough task. Yes, let's exchange the information, but let's commit to going out and doing this. Can I finally end with just thanking the organisers of this meeting? I think it's been a great meeting. Thank you so much. Booker, thanks so much for coming up. That sounded like a journey from, well, it sounded like a Northern Line journey, to be honest. Even worse than the Northern Line. But comrades, thank you so much, and thanks for giving up your Saturday evening.
Well, after that truly communist call to action, we will have some further discussion. So we have some time for questions and answers. Carlos, I know you're monitoring the chat. If people want to put questions, those of you who are watching us from the watching us online on the Zoom, please put your questions in the chat. Carlos will be monitoring it. Meanwhile, we are open to anyone who would like to make a brief comment, question. Please remember to keep it brief when you intervene. But yeah, we're ready. Any hands? Yes.
Roger, what you say, right, touches my very heart. My experience is that I'm totally frustrated that my own daughters, my grandchildren, are growing up and are not exposed to this. And when I try to speak to them, okay, it is a blank. And not only a blank, my son-in-laws who are English will retort, right, with a common rebuff or negative. So I fully understand your sentiments. And I tell you one thing, what I've decided to try to do is write a book for my grandchildren, no one else. And hopefully, right, hopefully my grandchildren will not read it because of what I write, but they will read it because it's written by the grandfather. And then they will open their eyes. I want to write something that's simple, just to tell them that they have to listen to the alternative views and do not trust the main media. I'm 79 years old, and I'm totally frustrated that it's so difficult to get this message, and the brainwashing of the past 3 generations. In my generation, we were able to stand up and speak. Vietnam War inspired us, and all sorts of things inspired us. But now, my children, my grandchildren, they are so obsessed. Not their fault. As Mao says, the sugar-coated bullets, they are fucked by that. They are so absorbed, okay, in their daily life, okay, that they just have no time. So what you say, right, touches me. And I'm keen to hear about other people's experience, right, in trying to talk within their own family to get the message across. Please wake up. You are walking your sleep. Western Europe will collapse, and your grandchildren, right, will wither in the process if you don't wake up.
I have a question at the back, and then Carlos. So, please.
I really enjoyed the meeting. It was just by pure coincidence I even knew about the meeting. I should have known about it, but glad I came. I enjoyed all of the contributions very much. And I particularly enjoy your emphasis on, we have to not only feel the injustice of the war, but have the correct analysis to approach it, to intervene, and make a difference. And I just want to introduce into this topic, that we work in this country And the reality is you are in the belly of the beast. You know, Anglo-American together have a part to play in every subterfuge, in every destabilization, in every war, all around the globe. But it's not just enough to say it's Anglo-American imperialism. We have to look at the political environment in which we operate. I totally agree. We need to go out into our community. We need to go to our trade unions. We need to go to working people. But there's nothing wrong with the British working people. We have to understand why it is they never hear our argument. And they don't hear our argument because it's not just Africa, Asia, Latin America that's dominated by imperialism. It's the British working class and the British working class movement and the British education system and the British press, media, British politicians on both strikes, the two big houses of Labour and Tory, are equally culpable and to blame. And I think we have to look very carefully, particularly this time when we've seen the leader of the Labour Party supporting the genocide in Palestine very openly and transparently. No ceasefire. It'd be wrong to have a ceasefire because Hamas, I'm afraid to mention Hamas because I keep on being arrested and come back. I go in public without even mentioning them. You know, but you're not allowed to speak up for the right of people to liberate themselves because that's racist. You're going to be shut down. But who are the people who support that? It's not just the Tories. The Labour Party leadership, and we have to look historically at the role Labour Party has played. And I don't want to be controversial, I don't want to stir up unnecessary controversy. But you know, Einstein's definition of foolishness, well, that's apparently apocryphal, but anyway, doing the same thing again and again, expecting different results. But we've got to have a look at what is the role of the successive Labour Party.
Could you wrap up, please?
I'm going to finish up. But you know, you look from the post-war administration who divided India, who invaded Korea, who had genocide they supported in later on in Vietnam, to look at our recent administrations of, you know, Tony Blair, who was happy to invade Iraq and Afghanistan and set off a genocide in motion. Of what about Gordon Brown, who took a tour of Africa, telling the African people, do you remember what a good thing British colonialism was? True. Gordon Brown, who bailed out the banks, inflicted austerity on the working people of Britain, encouraged the whole global finance capitalists to do the same. And then we're going right forward. Every single Labour Party leader has played an active part in anti-communism, in keeping down the working class, in keeping down the colonial people. Now, I don't want to, you know, say anything against the Morning Star. Many good things about it. Now, but I know many people from the CPD who currently refer to it as the Morning Star, because of the ongoing support for the Labour Party. We have to look at this. I know there's controversy within all the different groups. So many of our groups in our country support the Labour Party. We have to look at this.
Okay, can we have a discussion about the topic of the day? So we're not discussing UK politics. Please.
That oppresses those countries. So we have to look at our environment and say, is a call for vote for Labour. We've got a trade union movement that's openly voting for the war in Ukraine to continue. So we have to look at what's wrong with the policy of the Labour Party.
I think, thank you.
Like comrades'
Thank you.
thoughts on that issue.
Thank you. I have Carlos and I will watch for other hands. Carlos, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Radhika. And just on behalf of Friends of Socialist China, just want to say thank you so much to the speakers, to Radhika, to Booker, to Cecil, to Fiona, to Roger, to Alex. I think it's been a really fantastic, really kind of thought-provoking meeting, very powerful messages coming through. Thank you so much to the 50+ people in the room. We've got 80+ people on Zoom, as well as people watching on YouTube. So it's been a great event. Please, everybody, keep in touch. If you're not already regularly checking out the Socialist China website, it's socialistchina.org, and Twitter and all of that rubbish. I just wanted to ask Booker one question. We've got him over from Nairobi especially. I wonder if you could say something more specifically contrasting China's engagement with Kenya today with the imperialist countries, you know, with British and French and American engagement with Kenya in the past. I know, for example, that the Nairobi-Mombasa Railway, which has been financed and constructed by a Chinese company as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, is the largest infrastructure project in Kenya since independence. But beyond that, I don't know very much about the specifics of China's kind of economic engagement with Kenya. So if you could elaborate more, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. You know, the arrival of the Chinese capital in Africa was welcomed by both reactionaries and revolutionaries. That is what we must admit, because it was a sense of freedom from the dictatorship of IMF and World Bank that actually pushed to interfere with the internal affairs of those countries. So there was a sense of freedom by the arrival of Chinese capital. Also, I will give you an example why sometimes the local population, remember the IMF and World Bank, and particularly the civilized West and the United States, will give us a loan for a project. They will appoint a multinational company to do this project. This loan will finance what they are calling a feasibility study. There will be red tape and bureaucracy, and the entire feasibility study will take 10 years. And then they will tell us it is not viable, but you continue to pay the loan. A good example is the Lamu port that is now Berth 1 to 8 was financed by the Chinese capital. The same SGR, the Standard Railway Gauge, has been in discussion since 1960s. Even when we are talking about the highway from Nairobi to Mombasa, has been in discussions since the British, colonialism, 1960. But there are loans that have been given. A good example, a very sad one, is the case of Uganda, where we had the tallow oil. They did some preliminary investigations and realized we have oil in Kenya, we have oil in Uganda. But just because they want to suck the raw oil and process it outside the country, they tell you, brothers and sisters, your oil is not good to be processed. We need to do some additives. And this must not be done in your country. It must be done outside. So the neoliberal policies that have been imposed by United States imperialism has only reduced the African countries to cheap exporters of raw materials and also a dumping ground. Unfortunately, even in Kenya today, we are a second-class economy. Even our ideas, even things like beauty, they still want to interfere with our thinking of what beauty is. Even if you go to Nairobi, the cars, who is selling cars in Nairobi? In fact, all the, the second-hand cars are collected from Japan to Europe and dumped in Nairobi. So the clothes, when I was growing up, we used to have some industries that are manufacturing clothes. And people used to mock the old clothes that are coming from, let us say, Europe. The second-hand clothes, we used to call them the clothes of the dead king. But now people are celebrating, they're saying, no, this is more quality. And in fact, we are being convinced that manufacturing our own clothes will not meet the good standard of the second-class clothes coming from the global West. So that kind of difference. So basically, the arrival of Chinese capital means efficiency in terms of executing infrastructural projects. And even the nature of investment. How much money does USAID, for example, spend in Kenya today? But it's through what they're calling soft projects. So they are saying a campaign about now there is a big finance in NGOs on what they are calling mental health. You are told to talk to somebody about your mental health. But what is the root cause of mental health? If you don't have food, you're having a sick mother at home, and they're telling you, now we want to talk to you, and we want to counsel you so that you get over your mental health. I think that is the infantile talk that we see that is coming from the West. In terms of, now, mainly the money coming from the West, even in terms of aid, they are all invested to take the Kenyan people out of reality. For example, this Hollywood nonsense that they portray somebody from the poor neighborhood who now, is dining with the king and the queen because he's a good player of chess and is trying to encourage the poor people that, no, you can't be something. You just need to work a little harder. Or now, our president is now he's encouraging people to start your own things, sell something in the street to address poverty. This free enterprising that, of course, has failed at a global scale. But if we see from, for example, the Chinese investment in Kenya is on infrastructure. You can see, even if you don't like, they used to say our roads are littered by Chinese, but you can see the road is there. Not a paper in terms of feasibility study. So for us, that is the difference we see in our relationship with China. But who are these people who are lecturing about China? Are these not the same people, that robbed us? Are they not the same people who raped our mothers and fathers? Are they not the same people who, do not want us to develop? So we can criticize China, but not in the cynical and the racist way that the dominant class want us to criticize China.
Yes.
In fact, racism, even though it's institutionalized in the West, is a crime against humanity that we must fight and defeat. That is my...
Okay, we're nearly running out of time, but we'll take one more question and then I will ask the panelists for any last remarks that they would like to make. So please go ahead.
It's the first time to come here. Well, to book. I'm invited from Nairobi. My name is Cecil Guzmore. I'm member of the Political Bureau and Central Committee of the Sudan Communist Party. Sudan. I want to start from the last sentence. Walker said, we can criticize China from a different stand. China must know that there is nothing called neutral assistance and aid. You can assist and give aid to dictatorship who exploit people and who kill people and imprison people. China has made that twice in Sudan. With the Numeri dictatorship, with the Bashir dictatorship. And particularly with the Bashir dictatorship, it is even a sort of corruption. They built the National Congress Party with the Islamist Party, their headquarters, free. That is corruption. They built the president a new palace, and that is corruption. And that is because they allowed to exploit the oil of Sudan. I think we have problems with China,
when Nimeri killed our leaders, the Chinese leadership sends them a telegram of support. So they need, and that is where the historian said it properly, the class struggle, the class alliances. You don't ally with capitalists in the Sudan, Islamic capitalists in the Sudan, to destroy the working class movement, one of the strongest working class movement in Africa, might be compared to South Africa, but none has, even Egypt. Since 1946, we have the strongest working class, destroyed by Bashir, who was supported by China. So how come that? I think for me, my experience, I can't talk like about, as you can criticize China from our stand, also I can support human rights from my stand. Because human rights are violated in my country, I have to get the support for human rights respect and against those who violated the human rights. So I don't think speaking about human rights in that way, what is going in China is, yes, it is the Chinese people question to solve. But if we have to take example, we have to learn from the experience. The Chinese experience is not so good. The first part of it, when Mao was leading, is made the base, the real base for what is happening now. Even the World Bank were against China when they said, oh, China was able to bring these investments in China because the education and the health services and so built by the Mao era made the social labor value cheaper. Because this is the base. It created a good social labor, efficient housing, and so on. Sorry if that is wrong.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I think we will go in the reverse order of speaking. So we will start, I think, Roger, with you, if you would like to make a few closing comments. There you go.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. The thing is, we're big people now, right? We always have been big people, big enough to make decisions ourselves. And for me, that's the kind of fundamental issue here, is about not being told about what we're supposed to believe or do by anybody else, because that's what they're still doing with the African continent, as if we are little kids who can't make our own minds up about anything. We can't decide, apparently, on the African continent about who we can have relationships with, who we can trade with, who we can do whatever with. And if it goes against what the United States in particular wants to do. And I just think that era is ended. And they need to understand that this yesterday that they want us to stay in is gone. What the most important thing is now is what's tomorrow going to look like. And I think that's my point, really, what I was saying earlier on about this is a time for organisers and about what we need to do ourselves to shape what tomorrow is going to look like. So I just want to leave you with that and thank you all for coming out again this evening.
Thanks, Roger. We will have Cecil next. Cecil, please go ahead.
Very briefly, I have my doubts about the BRICS, and I hope I made that clear. In relation to Africa, Kwame Nkrumah, Walter Rodney, Amilcar Cabral, Frantz Fanon, and others have specified the neo-colonial nature of the regimes, and these are instruments of Western imperialism that dominate and run and facilitate the exploitation of Africa. We cannot use a category of global South to deal with that reality at all. What we have to do is revert or advance to class analysis and do it properly and engage in the struggles that are necessary. And right now, it's not looking all that good. Thank you.
Thanks. Alex.
The only thing I was going to add was that I don't think it's been mentioned, but it hasn't been mentioned. But Cecil just mentioned Cabral. Of course, this year is the 50th anniversary of the Portuguese Revolution, which started in Africa. And we need to actually take the opportunity afforded by that 50th anniversary to explain that history again. For one reason, because in Portugal things are going even worse than here. You've just had your fascist party has just had a quadrupled their number of seats in the parliament, but also because it's an example. It's I think probably the best example of a revolutionary movement that started in Africa as an independence movement, as an anti-colonial movement. It took 10 years, and then they took the revolution to Lisbon. And if you want to talk about a coup, that was a coup. It was led by the Young Officers Movement. It was led by the young officers who would no longer go out to Mozambique, Angola, and carry out Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde and the others, and carry out the oppression on behalf of the new state. So that's something we ought to, I would suggest, take the opportunity to really teach that again this year. It's a really important one. It has all sorts of important relationships with what's going on in Portugal, but also in Africa, with the movement in the Sahel, which has been referred to several times. And I think that what is going on in the Sahel is terrifically important. From what I understand, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from a deep theoretical examination by African and other political economists about the question of monetary and economic sovereignty, and the fact that the relationship that were held in by the French was a permanent systemic relationship of colonialism through the CFR, through the African West African franc. So that came out of a theoretical examination, and it's developed into a popular movement, and it's developed into the coups, as Booker and others have referred to them. This needs to be, I would suggest, discussed further in this country. We need a lot more clarity on those developments. So that's what I'd suggest we go forward and do.
Thanks, Alex, for a great idea for one of the next International Manifesto group webinars. So, I have next Fiona.
Really great discussion here tonight, and thank you all again for having me and for listening so attentively. I think the final thing I just want to close with is that we just need to remember throughout everything, with all the contradictions, that the primary contradiction is imperialism, and everything we do in our organizing work or mobilizing work should be with the aim of resolving that primary contradiction. The secondary contradiction, I would argue, is the working classes in whatever country we are, the mass movements, whether it's in Niger or Senegal or Palestine. It is down to them to self-determine their future. And I believe that sort of China's role in all of this is that counterweight to imperialism, and it's acknowledging that imperialism is a primary contradiction. So for better or for worse, its non-interference policy is one that I believe is the one thing that is going to keep driving this movement forward, and is what's needed right now at this current moment in time. And I really hope that we can build a world together. We can organize our working classes wherever we are together so that we can topple imperialism and we can address the secondary contradictions. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, Booker, I'm making up for all my interruption, then I'm cutting you off by giving you the last word. So here you go.
Thank you.
Sorry. Where are you? There you are. Sorry. Just it's a bit wobbly. My tripod is a bit wobbly. There you go.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to make my closing remarks and probably also pass my permanent and unconditional solidarity with the people that are resisting imperialism, even in the global south. You know, there is one country we always call the Cuba of Africa, Eritrea, that still continue to suffer under unilateral coercive measures and sanctions. At least in this extremely important forum, it's important that I mention. Of course, there's also the war that is underway in Sudan as well. It's important that we also show our permanent and unconditional solidarity with the great people of Sudan as they advance their revolution. And also, where in our own analysis, we see that the weakest link of imperialism is in Gaza, in Palestine. I think we need to also pass, at least this meeting should not end by, passing our permanent and unconditional solidarity with the heroic people of Palestine. So, comrades, in fact, the ongoing genocide in Gaza is helping us to even build the people's camp, the anti-imperialist camp. Remember, we have some 2 billion Muslims from Morocco to Indonesia. Definitely, they will support the people's camp, the anti-imperialist camp. The circumstances that, the United States imperialism, which we consider as the primary contradiction in the global order, is actually getting desperate every day. And we see Russia and China, DPRK, and the war in Gaza helping us to form the anti-imperialist camp. That is the first point I wanted to make. Of course, on the BRICS, we have to advance the struggle. And we also have to be cautious of who we form with alliances to take our struggle to the next level. Because if we don't do that, then we might be very good in analyzing the situations, but very slow to act because people will judge us. So we must act so that we learn from our mistakes to build this movement forward. Maybe in terms of the BRICS, for example, why are we supporting the BRICS? We can come here and say probably India is part of the BRICS, the most backward government that exists. You can also come and say, for example, Lula. Sometimes when we say we support, we give statements about Lula and support him. Some people attack us and say, but Lula, supported the members of the core group in intervening in the Haiti question. And even me here, I can tell you, now I'm here in London, but the CPC is meeting the ruling party in Kenya, Nairobi, the United States puppet. So all this I am trying to bring across is that at the very end of it, we must differentiate between primary contradiction, secondary contradiction, and tertiary contradiction to move our struggle forward. Because I will give you an example. Sometimes, and I think this we share even with the Sudanese Communist Party, because we say that really true independence only can be, true sovereignty can only be achieved through economic independence. So sometimes the communists have made deliberate, of course, to support the development of the productive forces in the global south. We have actually supported what we are calling the national bourgeoisie. Because at that time, in our own analysis, we see that the comprado bourgeoisie, which is basically the conveyor belt of the international bourgeoisie, really want to subjugate our economies into backwardness and only dump substandard goods and make profits. And even the money that the comprado class makes in Kenya is banked outside Kenya. In that case, sometimes you will find us that we've joined campaigns such as, buy Kenya, build Kenya. Some people say, but Booker, why is your party having a temporary alliance to support the national bourgeoisie at that time? Because the Kenyan, route to industrialization can only be supported from that end. And even in the Sahel region, for example, we are not saying that these are revolutionary coups. But look at what the French has been doing to these countries. At least we are moving one step. So in that way, I think it is important when we are looking at strengthening the anti-imperialist camp to actually critically think of the role of China in terms of defeating United States imperialism. If we do that, then we will move from one step to the other and then continue with our, revolutionary agenda. And then, of course, finally, is that the problems, because this is something that is being analyzed daily, the problems of the global south is systemic. It is in the neo-colonial system that have continued to be imposed upon the global south by the dominance class in the global north. And by addressing it, we can address the symptoms. But until we address the fundamental cause of the problems of the global south, by addressing the systemic change, then we may not be able to achieve. In fact, when we talk about the countries that, addressed the issues of their own people, are those countries that chose an alternative system away from neoliberalism and free enterprising that is being, sponsored by the dominance class in the global north. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So it only remains for me to thank, first of all of you who are here, everybody who's listening on Zoom and on YouTube. I'd like to thank, of course, Booker and all the speakers for giving us such inspiring thoughts and I think also calls to action, which I think are very relevant. And I'd like to thank, of course, the various organizers, Friends of Socialist China. Let me not miss anybody out. Friends of Socialist China, which organized this meeting, and the co-sponsors, the Morning Star, Caribbean Labor Solidarity, Black Liberation Alliance, and the International Manifesto Group. And in particular, I'd like to thank the Marx Memorial Library for hosting this event. I think it's a wonderful space, and we are very glad to be here, part of such a historic institution of the long, long struggles of the left, in which it's once again playing such an important role. So thank you very much.